Hello, you're listening to the Saluki Gamescast. This is episode 105 for Tuesday, February 25th, 2025. My name is Justin Young. Joining me as always are Alicia Utecht and Mario Sanders. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
We're almost done with February, and I am counting down the hours.
February's that bad?
February has been... Yeah, I'm ready to be done with February. I'm ready to have a life again and have spring break and...
What is it? 3 different Kleinau shows in February?
3 different Kleinau shows. In the first half of the month, I was still trying to push to finish my dissertation and graduate this spring, which I would have had to finish my dissertation by the end of this month. So I basically would have had to not sleep. So I set that goal aside, and that helped a lot. The snow days last week helped a lot, but I'm still just so ready for February to be done.
Have you seen that that reporter from St. Louis? It's a St. Louis television station, and he does this whole long monologue about why February is the worst month.
I have not, but I believe it, because one of my old professors in undergrad used to do the same thing of like every year February would roll around, she'd be like, here we go again.
Yeah, it's pretty entertaining. If you just search like February TV Inc. or monologue, it's like it'll probably come up. I think it's like WLKI or something. It might be the station. Anyways, yeah. So I had an interesting experience last night on social media. An episode of a podcast has been going viral. So even though I have no particular interest in this podcast, I had to check it out because I had to figure out how much of a train wreck this really was. And let me tell you, it's one for the ages. So there is a podcast of about Boy Meets World, the kids sitcom. Mm-hmm. And it has 3 of the cast members from the show. And so if you're not familiar, this is a TV show I think I've seen maybe 1 episode of ever. And I think I watched it because I was like, hey, it's Fred Savage's brother. I like the Wonder Years. And I think I watched an episode and it was a little too young for me at the time.
It was
I was going to say, was that too young for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Because what was it, late 90s?
I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like started mid-90s.
Because it was just before me.
Yeah. And so I feel like people who were a couple years behind me in school watched it.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I was like, I've kind of moved on to more kind of adult shows. While it was on, Buffy was on, and Buffy was the more adult show, right? Mm-hmm. So anyways, 3 of the cast members do this, they're working their way watching every episode of the show. That show was on for 7 seasons.
Yeah.
And then they've been bringing on other cast members, writers, other people associated with the show, like a lot of these sort of rewatch podcasts with the original stars. So there's been a lot of controversy around it because Ben Savage, who is the little brother of Fred Savage, apparently will not speak to any of them anymore. And none of them claim to know why he will not speak to them. They said he just stopped speaking to them, and they're not entirely sure why he will not speak to them.
It had to be fairly recent because they did the reboot.
Right.
A bunch of them were on.
Yeah.
Well, but even that was probably 5 years ago now.
Well, that's recent
I
compared
suppose.
to when the show first came out, because that was
Sabrina Carpenter.
Yeah, what's her face? Sabrina Carpenter was on that show.
Yeah.
Oh, was she?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Girl Meets World. So that was on the Disney Channel. So apparently part of this episode is them talking about what a train wreck that show was behind the scenes.
Okay.
And how horrible it was to work on. But they bring on one of the women who was a cast member of the original show who joined, I think they said season 5, redheaded actress who very famously left mainstream acting a few years ago and started doing adult films. So already, this episode is going to be probably interesting because at some point they have to address like, you know, the elephant in the room
Yeah.
and like talk about the fact that this woman has done this. And she's been very open about it, you know, that this is where her career's gone. But then they go at each other and it does not stop. And they start going at each other and it goes on for like, an extended long period of time on this podcast. And I was trying to explain it to somebody this morning. I was like you've been in the middle of two people fighting before, but like this, you feel like you can't extricate yourself from the situation. And I said, and it's so cringy, like each time that one of these people, like, because at times it feels like somebody's backing off and it's like, okay, well, we can agree to disagree. And the other person's like, no, screw you. We are going at this more. And you just like start tensing up every muscle in your body listening to it. And like, you know, there's part of me that's like, okay, well, like this is a good publicity stunt if they're doing it as a publicity stunt because everybody's talking about it. And
They must have, because I'm like, if it was a real fight, why would they not just edit it out?
well,
yeah, that is one. Why would you upload this?
Yeah.
well, I mean, because it's good for
I would say
ratings.
it has to
Oh,
be.
that's what I mean.
publicity.
Like, if this were something that were they're in the back of their mind, they're like, this is gonna bring more listeners to the podcast and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. So that's where
I don't mean that as like, oh, they're faking the argument. They aren't really
Oh,
arguing.
sure.
But they definitely looked at that. Like somebody edited this podcast and said, no, I'm going to leave that in because that's going to get us listens.
So part of the fight is over. Why did they not have this fight off air? And why did they wait to have it? And like one person wanted to wait and have it on the podcast and the other person claims to have wanted to have it off air. And it's one of those situations where you're like, I think both of you kind of sound like bad people. And I really don't want to be part of this at all. It's just interesting because so rarely does that happen. I feel like in media outside of like kind of like the fringe stuff, like occasionally you have like, you know, these two pop singers are feuding or something, but like you don't see too many actors like really go at each other in a situation like that. They would just avoid each other.
I mean, we do have Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni right now.
Right. But that's an exception, right? Like that's not the rule by any stretch of the imagination. That's
Right.
rewriting publicity for film studios as we speak. So, yeah, but like we don't have the two of them in a room, like
I suppose,
talking
yeah.
to each other.
Yeah, that's true.
So anyways,
Yeah, I didn't listen to the podcast and I didn't know what you were talking about until you mentioned that it was a Boy Meets World podcast because I just saw this morning something about, I don't know what their names are, Topanga.
Corey and Topanga, like
and then the other, I don't know what the other lady's name on the show is.
Rachel, I think maybe they said.
Sure. But that they went out at, and I was like, okay. And I scrolled past it. And
I was gonna say the thing I saw like a few days ago was like, oh, like the Boy Meets World actors like justifying why the Corey and Topanga characters getting married at 18 made sense, and I was like, okay, scrolled past. I have no clue about this.
no, I literally saw it this morning, so I assume it was about that, and it was about them going at it.
So it probably was not Corey and Topanga then. But
No, it's not the two of them going at each other.
Yeah.
Like Corey's the Ben Savage actor.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not him. It's Topanga and this other actress, Rachel. Her name is something like Matrina Ward, something like that.
well, I'm Googling this now.
But anyways, yeah. So, you know, if you want some drama,
Maitland Ward and Danielle Fishel.
Yeah. I feel like if OJ were here, they would be like ecstatic.
OJ would be all over this.
It's the sort of drama that OJ would eat up.
well, and I feel like that's also like right in OJ's
Yeah.
youth, I
Yeah.
assume, in
Yeah.
terms of like what they would have watched growing up.
Yeah. So anyways, if you're looking for a real like kind of train wreck of a podcast to listen to, like we don't usually do podcast reviews on here, but that one it's certainly interesting. Also, just some behind the scenes, like really horrible stories about what being on a kids sitcom in the 90s was like. So, at least that episode. I have not listened to the rest of that show. Again, it's a show I didn't watch, so it would be weird to listen to them recount episodes I have never seen. All right, we talked about the gossip. We spilled our tea, so let's move into what we've been playing. Alicia, what have you been playing?
So February has been crazy, so still just a lot of Pokemon TCG Pocket as far as playing. But I've been watching a lot, so brain, please. So we're supposed to get Deltarune chapters 3 and 4 this year. So I've been like diving back into all the Undertale and Deltarune YouTubers that I watch. So there are 2 fan games that I've been watching a lot of. One of them is Undertale Red and Yellow, which I think I talked about Undertale Yellow when it came out last year.
I remember you talking about an Undertale fan game.
You definitely talked about it at some point.
Fantastic game. Holy cow. It's incredible. That game creates a whole journey for the human with the yellow soul. And highly recommend. Oh my gosh, incredible. So then Undertale Red and Yellow is a fan game that you go through the original Undertale, but you have the ghosts of Clover, who's the yellow soul, and Kara, who's the original fallen child. And they're just like chiming in with you and having conversations back and forth the whole time. And it's so much fun. So really, really enjoyed watching that playthrough. And then the other one that I've been watching a lot of is Delta Traveler, which takes Susie and Chris from Deltarune. And
this is also a fan game?
Yes. Yeah, this fan game, the creator originally started it just to contribute to the Susie, Chris, where the hell are we meme. So the first chapter drops them in the original Undertale game, and then they have to find the gray door to travel through to try and get back home. Well, they travel through the gray door, and chapter 2 drops them in Earthbound, and then chapter 3 swings back and drops them in Underfell, because Undertale had such a huge AU community, or alternate universe community, that Underfell was one of the biggest ones. So chapter 3 drops them in there, and then the end of chapter 3 has a cliffhanger for dropping them in what appears to be Mother 3. So that has been really fun to watch. It's really fun seeing like what they do differently for the pacifist versus the genocide routes, or obliteration route, I think is what they call it for Delta Traveler. But yeah, so that's been a lot of what I've been doing, is just watching and then, rewatching Earthbound, rewatching Undertale, Vanilla. I should probably rewatch chapters 1 and 2 of Deltarune before 3 and 4 drop, because goodness knows I barely remember what happened.
All right.
Yeah, that's cool. Those are not games I ever play. I mean, like, I know a very surface level about Undertale. I know nothing about Deltarune, but that's cool to hear, like, sort of the depth of fan community and, like, all of the fan works that came out of it. It's unsurprising, but yeah, it's interesting to hear about.
Yeah, they're the kind of games that, like, I don't think I could ever play personally because I'm not a good enough gamer for bullet hell games. Mm-hmm. But I love watching people, watching Let's Plays and seeing people experience them, especially for the first time. Mm-hmm. And so, like, getting to, like, it's like when you have a favorite movie and you bring along your friend and you're like, come watch this, I want to see your reaction to it. Getting to see people's reactions, and then, like you said, just the thriving fan community, even though, it's been 10 years since Undertale. I think Deltarune Chapter 1 was 4 years ago. Chapter 2 was 2 years ago, something like that. And, like, the fan community is still so thriving.
And are these still all made solely by Toby Fox?
Toby Fox
official ones
does.
at least.
I'll say Toby Fox does have a team now.
Okay.
And he's hired fan game creators as like part of his team.
Cool.
He's very invested in he like definitely had to like step back for a while because it terrified him how big Undertale got.
Sure.
Valid, especially with how the fandom was. Like I was not part of it at that time, but I remember what it was like. But yeah, he's still the head. He still does, he and Temmie still do all the character designs together. He still does all the music. He still does all the translation work between the English and Japanese. So a lot of times people will like pick at differences there to determine more about characters. And it works to do that because it's still Toby Fox doing the translations back and forth and knowing what he's doing.
Sure.
But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sorry, Chester, yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, it's at least the Undertale is one that I've certainly been interested in playing at some point, but I do know what you mean in terms of come watch this, because that's how I am, at least with 999. I will watch somebody play that for the first time because there's so many just like big moments that, seeing their reaction to this thing or that thing is worth. I feel the same way, honestly, about Yakuza 0 as well. There's some big moments in that game that watching somebody play through it is a good time.
Yeah, I think Undertale is a very good game. I didn't quite fall in love with it as much as some people did, but like it's very good. I have not played the Deltarune chapters at all. But I think it's interesting, like fan games have existed for a very long time, right? Like people were making fan games back in the 80s, essentially making hacks of games and doing stuff. But like one thing that kind of I think is interesting about this is the like sort of like how the creators have embraced this, and that how also like it's a lot of narrative driven, like storytelling that's going on. So like when you see a fan game that's of a Mario, right, it's just like, hey, we're going to make new Mario levels, and like there may be a story here, but like nobody cares. It's not trying to fill in any like gaps usually.
Or even like Pokemon is the other one I see a lot of fan games of, and
right.
Infinite Fusion has a story, but it's pretty boring. You're there for the sprite art.
Right.
Pokemon Rogue is okay. Make Pokemon into a roguelite. Like they're not interested in a new story per se.
Right. And so I think that's particularly interesting hearing about these games because, I mean, another Metroid 2 remake is a really good remake of Metroid 2, but, and it fills in some maybe details of the world and everything. So there's some, sort of experiential storytelling going on there. But like to be like, hey, I'm going to take this character and go tell their story. I feel like that's the sort of thing you would expect to see like from a Final Fantasy fan game. And those probably exist, but like I've never seen or heard of those.
Yeah.
So it's kind of more interesting like hearing about this.
For all my obsession with Final Fantasy 7 over the years, I've never seen a 7 fan game I'm sure they're out there, but they've certainly never reached the level of these.
Well, and that would be hard for 7, but like easier for something sprite based like this, right? Like, so if we got one for Final Fantasy 1 through 6, you could see that much easier. All right, cool. Anything else?
That's been the big stuff,
Okay.
Still chilling out, watching Stardew Valley as well, but I feel like I don't have anything new to say about Stardew Valley. It's just cozy.
All right. Mario, how about you?
The last thing I played was Jet Set Radio. I had played Jet Set Radio Future a very little bit as a kid, but never, beat it or anything like that. And so this was the first time really like sitting down and playing it all the way through. And I think part of that is I picked up Bomb Rush Cyberpunk at some point last year when it was on sale and knew I would want to play this one first. And same thing, had this one. And so played it, and I mean that's a really fun game. I think that's a game that holds up really well. I think my frustration isn't the right word. Where I struggled most, and we'll talk about Tony Hawk later, is I kept wanting to play it like a Tony Hawk game, and it really is so much different.
Same. At the time when that game came out, I wanted it to play more like a Tony Hawk game.
Yeah. But it's such a good game. The music is fantastic.
I'll say, isn't that one of the ones that they announced they're doing a remake of or a re-release or something?
They're doing a new game in the
They're doing a new
franchise.
game.
I'm not surprised. And like I said, Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, which came out in 2023, was kind of a spiritual sequel, but it made by completely different people. So I guess this would then be the third game, because Future was a sequel to the original, right? Yeah, like I said, it's a really fun game. I think the one thing that there are some times where it feels very like you don't have to be super precise, and there are other moments where like you have to have such precision with landing on those rails that sometimes it felt a little inconsistent there. And that game is really floaty, and I understand why, but it's very floaty. So it's can be hard to pick up if you are more experienced with like the Tony Hawk games, or going from Tony Hawk to that to think it's going to be something similar. It is not similar, but a great game. It's one that I would definitely recommend to people.
Yeah, its controls are finicky.
Yeah,
in a way that you would never describe Tony Hawk. It even at the time, right? Like that was the major complaint about that game, was that the controls are a little too finicky. Like you want to play that game because it looks so cool, and it has like such a style to everything in the game: the music, the graphics, the kind of like story and everything.
Yep.
And you're right, like it's floaty for a reason, but like all of that contributes to like controls that, it's one of those games where it doesn't feel like it's always doing what you want it to do, which can be, you said you didn't want to use the word frustrating. Like I think it can be frustrating at times playing. And I say that as somebody who really likes that game a lot.
Yeah. No, like I said, it's one that I would very easily and very quickly recommend to people if they've never played it before. And I played it on Steam, and I think the Steam version like runs really well. It's not a game you have to like go try and find or hunt down an emulator for. But yeah, it's one that takes a little bit of time in terms of getting used to the way that it controls, for sure.
Yeah. Cool game though. Like certainly a hugely influential game. Like there's been a lot of games that have like tried to mimic that style over the years.
Mm-hmm. Other than that, I haven't played much. March will be a big month in terms of playing a bunch of random things. It's one of those months of, it's a month that I put a list together, and myself and friends will play through the list of games. So
I'll say March is Gatorade month, right?
March is Gatorade month. So I'll have things to talk about in the coming weeks.
Would that be mostly N64 games or?
No, actually, I think I only have one N64 game on the list. It's actually mostly Game Boy Advance games.
Okay.
And I think that's mostly because those are easy to emulate. N64 games are kind of a crapshoot,
right?
Whether they emulate well or not.
So can you give us a preview, or don't want to spoil it?
Sure. No, I mean, I'll just read through the list if you give me just a second. So yeah, the way that I do it is they're categorized by color, and the goal is to play through 3 games from each color and then the sports finale game. So the red games are Arrow the Acrobat on the SNES, Chicken Run, the movie game, which is what I have called We Have Metal Gear Solid at Home.
Yeah, because that's like a stealth game, isn't it?
Yeah. Scourge Hive, which is a sort of Metroid-like. Tai-Fu, Wrath of the Tiger, which is a PlayStation 1 game. Those are the red games. Blue games are Big Mountain 2000, which is a N64. Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. Mario Party 5. and Sonic Advance.
Wait. Mario Party 5, like, how do you play through, like...
There's a story mode.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think the story mode's great, but there is a story mode. And then the yellow games are Evil Zone, which is a PlayStation 1 fighting game. Four Swords, the Zelda that came comboed on the Game Boy with the like multiplayer one.
Yes.
With Link to the Past.
Also has one of the best manga adaptations of any video game.
Cool. Frogger's Adventure and Tony Hawk Underground 2. And then our sports finale game is Go Go Beckham Adventure on Soccer Island.
That's an amazing title.
I don't think I've ever heard of that game.
I think it was a European-only release.
Oh, okay.
Which is probably not surprising.
No.
Which I think I have also referred to, we have Yoshi's Island at home.
I mean, does it play like Yoshi's Island?
You carry a soccer ball around, and those are essentially the eggs that you would throw.
Are you trying to rescue Posh Spice?
I don't think you are, but that would be pretty fantastic.
It'd be great if, like, you have to rescue all the Spice Girls in order to save her in the final.
I mean, maybe that's what it is, because, you know, to get with her, you got to get with her friends, right?
Right?
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? I don't know. I've watched.
Be.
I only watched the first, like, little bits of the first level. So those are the games that I'll be playing. At least 10 of them over the course of March.
Well, at least we know you'll be playing Go Go Beckham Island.
I will be. Well, and then there's one addendum to the games list that I have every year is there's one friend who is very resistant to playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories on the PlayStation 1, mostly because it's a bad game. But the addendum is anybody can replace one of those games with a vanilla playthrough of Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories.
Okay.
As compared to one of the card mods where you get more cards for a win.
I love that.
All right. That is a unique assortment of games.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm familiar with Evil Zone.
It's like anime. It's an anime fighter.
Okay.
So that's probably why.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know. This is Gal Guardian's
So true.
player.
So true.
I mean, look, like in that era, like every fighting game that was coming out had like a just insane title and premise.
Also, every
There's
anime
so-
had a fighting game.
I don't think it was an actual anime. It just has like an anime aesthetic to it. And there are just so many of those janky PlayStation 1 fighters.
Right. This 3D fighter.
Honestly, I don't know.
Oh,
I think
okay.
it's more 2D, but it's probably 3D.
Okay. That's what I think of with the PlayStation is like bad 3D fighters.
Yeah.
I know there were 2D fighting games on there.
The one that we played a couple years ago was Rival Schools, which
Right.
I have a lot of nostalgia for that game. This is like the art for it, so very, very anime aesthetic, but I don't know how it actually looks in game.
You could tell me that's one of 1,000 different animes. I totally believe you. All right, cool. Anything else?
No, that's about it.
All right. Steam Next Fest is going on. So this is where Steam like tries to get lots of games that are coming out soon to release demos in order to like drive up hype and promote these games. So I played a few games as part of that. One of them is a game called Hoop Fighters. So Hoop Fighters is a basketball game, not a hula hoop fighting game.
Dang it.
That would be too cool. So it's a basketball game that's meant to be sort of like a couch co-op multiplayer game. I think you can play up to 6 players at a time with it. It does have online play, so even if you don't have somebody to play with locally, you can hop on and play against somebody else. I did that. I thoroughly beat them down pretty like rough. Like to the point like it was 14-0 at one point. I felt kind of bad.
Oh man.
So this is a game, like, I guess the best way to describe it might be is sort of NBA Jam like if NBA Jam was from an overhead perspective.
Okay.
And you like have a giant boxing glove that can come out and punch the other player and knock the ball loose.
So it's basketball with hockey rules.
Boxing as well, I suppose. It's interesting. It's not sticky enough of one of those couch co-op games where you feel like, oh, we would want to come back to this and play for an extended period of time. Like, I feel like it's really easy to make a couch co-op game. It's really hard to make one that people want to come back to again and again. So like at Playing for Pets, I know this last year and a lot of years, we play a game called Super Slam Dunk Touchdown. I think that's the name of it. And that game always gets like a big response from people, and like it's just sticky enough you would go, let's play that again sometime, right? And this feels like one that hasn't quite worked that out. It is a demo. It's not the full release, so maybe there'll be some patching up to it.
So a question then that I have for you.
Sure.
One of the things that I think, and so the game that I'm actually more comparing it to is like one of those like silly fighting games would be closer to like a Gang Beasts.
Sure, yeah.
To me, the best thing about those games is they really feel like a free-for-all. There's certainly some skill to them, but it's like, it doesn't really matter. There's so much
Anyone
that's out
might
of your
win.
hand.
Is Gang Beasts the like floppy?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And to me, hearing that you were up 14-0 feels like there's maybe a bit of a skill threshold to this in terms of like, you have to, if you don't pick it up, you're just going to get sort of like whomped every time, as compared to a Gang Beast where it doesn't really matter. You might just get owned.
I think maybe in a 3 versus 3 game, it might have more of that chaotic Gang Beast feel to it. One-on-one, it was way too it was way too easy to like sort of manipulate the game physics.
Gotcha.
And like score super easily.
That makes sense. I didn't realize you had played. I mean, you did say. I didn't realize you were playing a 1-on-1. Yeah. A 3-on-3. I could definitely see that being the case.
It doesn't have CPU players when somebody's not controlling them. So it's not like you have in NBA Jam a CPU controlled teammate, right? I will say, like, this sort of just brings me back to the point I brought up before on this podcast, which is, why does somebody not make a new NBA Jam style game? Like, why not make a good one of those?
There you go. They tried, and it just wasn't good.
Well, I mean,
Gold Star, you tried.
And they make 2 of those Playgrounds games.
yeah, but those games don't play anything like NBA Jam.
Okay, that's
I mean, that's the big disappointment. Like, they look like it, but as soon as you pick that game up and play it, it doesn't play anything like NBA Jam or an NBA Street, right?
Yeah,
which is sort of more of a 3D version of NBA Jam in a lot of ways. So yeah, I mean, you know, I applaud the effort, and maybe this game gets there eventually. Gang Beast was a game that took years in early access. So like, I could see with more stuff going on, this could be more fun. But, you know, right now it feels almost more like tech demo-ish than like a full game.
That's cool. It sounds like there's maybe some hope.
Yeah.
It's not like a thumbs down, but like maybe a slight thumbs up. One that there's something maybe to continue looking for.
Thumbs in the middle, like hoping that maybe my initial reaction will be proven wrong.
Okay.
Like, I am always optimistic. I always want games to be good.
Of course.
Like, I get no joy from a game being bad unless it has Sonic in the title. No, I'm just kidding. Even those games, like I talked last week, I was so disappointed in that Sonic racing game because like I so desperately wanted it to be transformed too, right? Like, so.
And with these games still being demos, like they're very much looking for that feedback in terms of like what to add. And so, yeah, hopefully other people will communicate that same thing.
The other game I played was Descenders Next. So this is the sequel to Descenders. Descenders is a mountain bike game. So I feel like this has been on like Game Pass and like some other platforms before, the original Descenders. But Descenders is a mountain biking game where it really produces a fantastic sense of speed while you're playing it. Like, you feel you're going down a mountain on a course and it feels like completely out of control. Like you feel like at any moment you're going to crash into a tree and, like kill yourself is how it feels. It produces that sense in a way that very, very few games I feel like do, like even racing games. And so the original Descenders is all mountain biking, does that extremely well. Descenders next is taking out the mountain biking, at least so far. Maybe they'll add it back in, but is more focused on snowboarding and what's called mountain boarding, which mountain boarding is like, to me, looks like a longboard with wheels on the outside of it, 4 wheels on the outside of it.
Okay.
And so the biggest shift, so like the mountain boarding looks and plays just like the original Descenders, really. The only difference really being that the physics are a little different because of the board is going to control different than a mountain bike. So like the precision control that you have with the original with controlling a mountain bike, this is more a little kind of like loose and sloppy as you're going down, which is probably accurate. Like looking at a mountain board, that is probably how it controls. It's not going to control as well as a mountain bike. But the problem is the thrill of the original Descenders, for me at least, is that sense of speed, that sense of like out of control chaos. And like, I am just barely getting through this course by the skin of my teeth. And like at any time it could go awry and, I could crash. That sense is mostly gone. And so they've tried to replace it with a more robust trick system that I feel like is in the original Descenders. So they're like, there are like rails you can grind and some stuff with that. And so that fits very well with the snowboarding as well. The snowboarding is less of like a carved course that you might see in a 1080 Avalanche or an SSX Tricky game. And it is more of a wide open, and you're like following markers that are on the ground. So they have these like markers, look like flares on the ground, and there's smoke coming up. You have to follow from one to the next. But again, also rails to grind, also jumps to go off of, and that sort of thing. I think it was last week I talked about the snowboarding game. I will say this controls significantly better.
I was just about to ask, how does it compare to Snow? I think it was literally just called Snow.
Yeah. This controls better than that to me, right? Mm-hmm. That's always going to be a question of taste. So I think it definitely controls better. But again, like so far, the courses that I played in the demo of this don't have that sense of like speed, right? And so if you tell me the people who are making who made Descenders are making a new version with snowboarding, I am picturing SSX hurtling down a mountain at breakneck speeds, like feeling kind of out of control, and this does not have that.
So that's actually what I was about to ask you, if it was like an SSX, but I'm looking at Descenders right now. This is not the graphics I was expecting. I thought it was much more like cartoony, but it's not.
You're looking at the original?
No, I'm looking at Descenders next.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's got more realistic graphics. I mean, it's certainly still stylized, but
it's not super detailed graphics, but like they certainly are evocative as you're playing them.
The one that I feel like, I don't know what game it was, but it was, and that's what I was thinking of, was it looked like a little Gang Beast character going down a mountain. So that's what I was thinking. I was like, oh, that's probably not like SSX. No. Did you ever play Driftwood, the sloth mountain boarding game? Yeah. Does it feel similar to that?
Maybe a little bit like the mountain boarding aspect, at least as far as control, right? But like that game was much more kind of a chill vibe.
Yeah.
That game didn't feel to me as much like this sort of out of control, like not as much as the original Descenders on the BMX.
Gotcha. So I haven't played the original Descenders, but to me, Driftwood did a really good job in terms of like making it feel like you were going really fast.
Yeah, it does.
it didn't have like the chaos element to it, but
right.
and in terms of like that sense of speed. And so that was
Yeah.
one of the I was trying to remember what the name of that game was. Okay.
Yeah, that game does well. There's a PlayStation 2 game called was it Downhill Domination? That's a mountain biking game, and that game for a PlayStation 2 game, right? Like does an exceptionally good job of like conveying speed. And that was sort of their attempt to make a mountain biking SSX, or that's how it felt at the time.
Gotcha.
Right.
Maybe well, I know it's not because it was like a skiing game, but the graphics I'm thinking of was more in the lines of like the Lonely Mountain Downhill game. That's the game that I saw, and so that's what I was thinking of. But
yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Yeah. So this is interesting. Like, I will say that the original Descenders was a game that was received content updates for a very long time. I think it was partially in early access, but even after it released, there were additional tracks and updates. They added a first-person mode at one point, which is really terrifying if you get motion sickness. So, you know, this is interesting because I think they'll like continue to work on it. And if you're really into either of those, like sort of, you know, mountain boarding or snowboarding, then I think it's going to be even more exciting for you. All right, let's move on to the news. Konami and Bloober Team have announced that they are working on a new game based on a Konami IP. This is following their team up on the remake of Silent Hill 2. Boy, this seems like it's probably another Silent Hill remake, or an entirely new Silent Hill game. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, that's probably what it is, but I can hope it's like a Castlevania
I'll say
game.
I'm still dreaming of the day we get Castlevania 1999. But yeah, it's probably Silent Hill.
I mean, given Bloober Team's like background in making horror games and stuff, like I feel like Castlevania would make a lot of sense, but like their sort of stuff is less the like, you know, kinetic action and more kind of like the slower paced games.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, though I kind of feel like they're probably, after the success of that game, going to work their way through remaking at least the well-liked Silent Hill games.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's see. I guess we haven't talked about it. We mentioned briefly Tony Hawk, right? Like we talked about it off air. Tony Hawk 3 and 4 remaster has been teased in Call of Duty Black Ops 6. There was a little sign in one of the levels, like with a countdown to March 4th. Then also the Tony Hawk game social media account has posted an image of Tony Hawk and some of the other skateboarders from the games, also with a countdown to March 4th, which is a week from today. So a week from today, we are probably going to get news on something new with Tony Hawk, and pretty much everyone in the industry is saying, yes, this is a Tony Hawk 3 and 4 remaster.
I think the weirdest part of this to me is that it was teased in Call of Duty. Like, that's not two franchises that I think of crossing over.
Right. I mean, they're both Activision, right? Which is owned by Microsoft now. But yeah, it does feel like a weird way to tease that. Because, I mean, you sort of think, like, where is the crossover of fans?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there is
some.
I'm
sure there was crossover, you know. I guess that they're both games that teenage boys played when I was in middle school, but
yeah.
I say they just brought the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Call of Duty, so maybe Tony Hawk is next.
Yeah, I posted that image in the group of the Ninja Turtles and a Terminator T-800, it looks like a fighting game, like selecting your character for Call of Duty.
Mm-hmm.
Was that not what it was?
No, it's Call of Duty.
Well, but yeah, I figured it was like a PvP mode.
Well, it is, but I mean, it's also weird, like Call of
Oh, it's
Duty
weird no matter what.
having like this weird assortment of guest characters, right?
Yeah, they had 3 WWE wrestlers in I think the last Call of Duty, which is also it's extra weird to have real humans in it. I was joking about Tony Hawk until I remembered, like, oh yeah, like Rhea Ripley is in the last Call of Duty game.
There's one level where it's weird to have actual humans, and there's another level where it's weird to have the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like,
yeah, I mean, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles just feels like a lot of these franchises, like the Fortniteification of every franchise.
I suppose too. I guess like my default Call of Duty is like World War II. And I just remembered that they have like Call of Duty Zombies, so I'm like, okay, maybe TMNT is not that weird.
Well, historically, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fought in World War II.
Of course.
I mean, I am sure there's a comic book of that. They have teamed up with Batman, so like everything's game. But yeah, I mean, like it's weird, right? Like I think Ninja Turtles are weird. I think what makes it weird is when you take like real humans who aren't in character, right? It's one thing to put Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator into a game.
Yeah.
It's different to take Rhea Ripley, who, yes, is playing a somewhat of a character in wrestling, but is like just a real person, right? Like that's like putting Barack Obama in it, right? Like it would be weird to be shooting Barack Obama, and I'm going to get on some like watch list now.
I was going to say that could go.
But, you know, it's one thing to put like famously like Bill Clinton was in NBA Jam. He was an unlockable character in NBA Jam.
Why?
Because
why not?
Because they were crazy people at Midway back then.
Yeah.
But like it's something very different to put Bill Clinton into Call of Duty where you're like shooting him, right? Like that feels like weird for it to be a real person, not a character. As weird as the Ninja Turtles are in a military shooter, like at least they're like these wholly fictional characters, right? So yeah, so
it's
like,
okay. They won't really put Tony Hawk. They'll just put some guy who looks like Tony Hawk.
right. It'll be Tony Hawk from the movie Rad, or no, Gleaming the Cube. Sorry, Rad is the BMX movie. So yeah, we're getting a new Tony Hawk game, remakes of 3 and 4. You know, 1 through 4 are, I think, generally considered to be like the classics of that franchise, and then Thug is, I feel like, so different that there are certainly like a huge amount of fans of that, but it's almost like they kind of abandoned the Pro Skater and went and did a spinoff with Thug and made something like slightly different.
Yeah, they're far more story based than the Pro Skater games where you're just sort of going through each of these levels. And that's where we had talked about, I know we talked about in the past, we talked about it before this episode. It makes you wonder if the underground games would be next, but as I think we mentioned last time, and as we mentioned earlier, I don't know if those games like culturally hold up as well, just like with the performances of like masculinity and all those sorts of things and how it presents itself, if those would hold up as well as the Pro Skaters do.
Those are very much of a time, right?
Yeah.
The MTV, Jackass, Tom Green sort of era. And like how much of that, because you're right, part of the appeal of those games is the story, right? Not so much the story's kind of like lose it, but like the story's woven into the missions, like you're doing stuff within the levels that's story related.
Yes.
And so like how much does that translate versus the original games are just, you know, like some of the references are maybe dated. But those games, as you know, we were talking about off air, those games still hold up extremely well. You can go back and play the original Tony Hawk 1 through 4 on the PlayStation or PlayStation 2, and those games still play remarkably well. Yeah, so I don't know. Like, I will say that Tony Hawk 1 and 2 is one of the best remakes that I've ever seen. You know, taking a game and that was already pretty perfect and like updating in really smart, good ways, adding the moves that got added later, like the manual and the revert and all of that, adding those so you can do those in Tony Hawk 1 levels and Tony Hawk 2 levels. So, you know, I think the only thing that's maybe a little weird, I remember Tony Hawk 4 being slightly more open world. Like the levels were bigger. You get off your skateboard and kind of run around in the levels more. So I don't know if that translates as easily as 1 and 2 and 3 do. But obviously that would be a big issue for Thug as well, right? Like,
yeah, I played 4 last year, and I think it holds up fine. So it's not one that I would be as concerned about. I mean, it might be the one thing that would be weird is if you added that to the previous games. Like if you made that ability in 3 or in 2, does it break levels because you can access certain areas or get certain items, the upgrades and stuff like that a lot easier. But I think, the thing that we had talked about, I'm not surprised they're doing 3 and 4. I think that's great. I would love to just see them make a new one, at least an attempt at making a new one. Clearly they've showed or realized like, okay, people are liking these. There's still some amount of a desire to go back to them and to play them. And so if we made a new one, technically Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 6, but even if it was just like a full reboot of a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, I would love to see what they could do. And I think one thing that you had mentioned would be, what if they made it more of a live service game? I think that would be like a really great idea. I think that there's a lot you could do with that formula.
Yeah, the image that they used to advertise this on social media said new levels, more parks coming soon, something like that. And so, really there were new moves in those games. So as you went from Tony Hawk 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, they always would add at least like one new move that sort of changed the way the game played, right? But like really what you were doing is getting whole new designs of levels from each game. So if you make a new Tony Hawk 6, right? Are you in 2 years going to make a Tony Hawk 7 or Tony Hawk 8? Like, do people buy games that way anymore, right? And like outside of sports, right, people just don't buy games that way anymore. Like even when you look at something like the Forza games or Gran Turismo, like those games last now for years. They're not like yearly franchises. And they get updated, new courses, new maps and that sort of thing. So I kind of wonder, do you make a new Tony Hawk and say, okay, it's going to come with 5 levels, and then, you can buy these more levels for $10 in a year, or, some way they monetize that.
Similar to Mario Kart 8 with like the bonus tracks and stuff like that. I mean, and I know you had mentioned a couple of years back that like something like Madden or NBA going to a live service also just makes a lot of sense. I think they make way too much money just selling a new one every year, but
they can still get people to spend $70 on that.
But I think that it makes it an intriguing option now that this is like a common design philosophy with games. If you could do a Tony Hawk in that vein, and if it would be successful.
Well, one of the things that's happened with racing games is sort of like we were talking about with Mario Kart are people going to, obviously people will buy Mario Kart. They've sold like 50 million copies of 8 Deluxe. But like most arcade racing games don't exist anymore. Like as a genre that's kind of died off, like much to my chagrin. And part of the problem is, well, okay, you put this game out, it has 5 or 6 tracks. Is that enough for somebody to spend $70, right? Or is that going to keep people playing it for a long period of time? And so you almost have to have DLC as part of the plan. So I feel like, like Tony Hawk is sort of like a racing game. It's also sort of like a platformer because so much of playing those levels is figuring out how to do the things that you have to do in the levels. So there's a tape up there. I can see it, but I don't know how to get to it. And, I have to go over here and I have to like get up on top of this building and then I have to grind over this to get over and finally reach this. And so like, it's a weird mix of platformer with racing game and, I don't know where it fits in the market today. And I say that as somebody who loves those games, some of my favorite games of all time. And I loved 1 and 2. So I don't know how they do it from a financial standpoint. Not from a creative standpoint. I think they could make a really cool game, but just from a financial standpoint, how that makes sense.
You mean of releasing a new one every couple of years?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of these things of how do you monetize this, right? Like we talked about this last week with the Five Nights at Freddy games. Like, how do you monetize this? Like, how many people are actually going out and buying this game when you put out a new Five Nights at Freddy game? For a while, it was like every year, right?
Yeah.
And like those games are really cheap to make. These games aren't as expensive as a Spider-Man, but they're still, a little pricey, and you're paying for the licensing of the music.
Sure.
That sort of stuff. Speaking of games that seem to be having problems, Marvel Rivals has laid off the director and other U.S.-based developers that worked on some of the levels within the game, some of the different play fields. This despite the fact that the game has hit 40 million players. So 40 million people have played that game, and they're laying people off associated with it, which seems kind of crazy.
Yeah, I feel like my response to this is very similar to like when they shut down the Hi-Fi Rush studio last year of like, wow, you really just can't win, can you?
Yeah,
you can have an incredible game. And
speaking of another game that was influenced by Jet Set Radio.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that like in many ways this feels like the most popular game like going right now. If certainly one of them. I mean, in terms of like seeing people who are playing it and streaming it on live streaming services.
Even just hearing my students talk about it before class yesterday. Like
yeah, I think, and this very much it feels like we don't need you anymore. You've done your job. See you later.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in that I know this game technically came out the end of last year, but it almost feels like this year's Helldivers.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Like, it is the popular online shooter. Maybe like Helldivers, people move on, but like, it seems like this game was at least originally developed with a plan to continue to support it. They've been rolling out new like sort of seasons, right, with new characters.
They just came out with, I mean, they've had 4 new characters thus far, all the Fantastic Four. The Thing and his name Johnny
Storm.
Like they just came out like last week, I want to say.
Right.
And I saw a thing that like people data mined and there's code of like another 20 or 30 characters or something like that. And, who knows if that ends up being the case, but this seems like this could easily reach in terms of like popularity, the levels of an Overwatch,
Right.
In terms of a competitive scene around it. And it's obviously got one of the most popular franchises going right now to like also attract people to it.
Well, obviously they're rolling out the Fantastic Four because the trailer for that rolled out. The movie's coming out this summer. You want to have those characters in there, which makes you wonder, like the Thunderbolts movie is coming out in, I think, May.
Yeah.
So like, do you try to make sure you get at least a few of those characters into the game? And obviously those characters that don't have superpowers, like, I'm the Winter Soldier, I have a gun, like seems like if he's not in there already, seems like a character that you want in this sort of game.
He is in there.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I haven't watched a Marvel movie in a while, but wasn't like MODOK spoiled in one of a post trailer?
Probably.
I
never watched Quantumania.
Okay, I think he was listed as like one of these upcoming characters, and so yeah, like it's to me, like I said, this feels like a thanks for doing your job. Good luck in your future endeavors.
Yeah, so there is a bigger story here. NetEase, who is the publisher of Marvel Rivals, reportedly is divesting international studios, which would be their American developers. The director and those developers were apparently in the Seattle area. So they seem to be in the process of divesting themselves from all these international studios. Those people they just let go, but they also own Quantic Dream, who made the game Detroit. I know one of Christina's favorites. Nagashi Studio. Nagoshi. And Grasshopper, who made No More Heroes. So, these are pretty big developers that they bought, and now they're kind of like, hey, it seems to be that they're shopping these developers around saying, does somebody want to take these off our hands, or else we're just going to shut them down?
Well, and I think the one that sticks out to me, just like as a fan of Nagoshi Studios, I don't think they've even put anything out yet. But
I don't think they have.
This is the creative director. He was at Sega for like 30 years, but the creator of the Yakuza franchise left Sega and now started his own studio. They haven't even put out a game yet.
Right.
And that's one of the more popular franchises that's going right now. They also put out a game pretty regularly, and so
you mean Yakuza?
Yakuza, yeah. And so, like, to think that they might get shut down before they even have a chance is like really disappointing.
Yeah, like Quantic Dreams is not for everyone, but there is certainly an audience for their games. Like they have put out way too many of that style of game for there not to be an audience for it, right? People are buying those games. And Grasshopper, I feel like it's one of those like weird studios that makes the sort of game, Killer 7, No More Heroes. They make those sort of like very niche, kind of weird. They're still making the sort of games that people were making in the PlayStation 1 and 2 era.
Yeah.
Which is like super cool from my perspective. So yeah, this is potentially sad. We'll see what comes of this. Nothing is 100% certain yet, except for those layoffs to the Marvel Rivals team. But speaking of potentially selling things, the Pokemon Go developer Niantic is in talks to sell the game to a Saudi Arabian firm. So, give a little like kind of explanation for this. This would sell the game itself off. They would potentially, as part of this deal, continue to receive the data from the game. Because for Niantic, Niantic is a spinoff of Google. So for Niantic, they have now like almost, 10 years of Pokemon Go that's been going on?
2016.
Yeah, so almost 10 at this point. They have all this data of how people move around the world, right? So every time you open up Pokemon Go, they can track your GPS. They have to. That's how the game works, right? So they have all this data of where people congregate, where people move through the world and everything. You can imagine the value of selling that to people making GPS software, the value.
Well, they already have. They've admitted that.
Right. So that's a big benefit to them, right? And at this point, like, is the game really of a keen interest? They have tried to replicate Pokemon Go's success with Harry Potter and with Pikmin.
Well, that's what I was going to say is like the only other Pokemon Go-esque game that's remotely successful and still alive is the Pikmin Bloom game, which is also Niantic. The Harry Potter one died. Everybody who tried to do it in 2016, 2017, they're all of those games are dead. So it's like, I'm worried if Niantic sells off the game that it's going to crash and go down in flames.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, if you're buying this and you're buying this for, potentially in the billions of dollars, right? This is something you would want to be able to milk for a while to go. So it's not something you would go, we're going to buy this and scrap it in a year, because like the entire value of this game at this point is there's a built-in audience that is still pumping money into this game, right? And you're going to be able to milk that for the next, 5 to 10 years, right? Like, I mean, realistically, this game is probably not going to survive another 20 years, like just because few games do.
Yeah.
Like maybe, right? But like probably not. But like
That Simpsons game.
right. But it's probably got another 5 to 10 years in it, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Part of me also sees that this is a Saudi firm and probably got money to blow. So whether it's making money or not, might not be the biggest of deals. And, they can buy it for whatever probably price Niantic would want to sell it for. So I could certainly see, I think it definitely has legs.
I don't know what the Pokemon companies say in this situation is, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how that contract works. What percentage of the game do they have any say in how it gets sold off, right? I mean, the Saudi investment firm, the Saudi sovereign firm is maybe what it's called, has invested in Nintendo, right? So we've talked about that on this podcast. They have some stake in Nintendo, like 3 to 5% stake in Nintendo. So certainly Nintendo has no ethical issues in dealing with Saudi Arabia as an investor. So I don't think we're going to see Pokemon Go away anytime soon, though. Like I don't think that's what the takeaway from this story should be.
Will it transform into Pokemon Go Beckham?
Maybe.
I think more like this is a commentary on how Niantic has just utterly failed to replicate the success. Mm-hmm. This feels to me much more like Minecraft and Fortnite, like that when one of these games comes along, it is almost impossible to replicate it.
Yeah, and I feel like a big part of that is you've got to be able to take that audience away from Pokemon Go. And I don't know if there's any franchise. Harry Potter would have been maybe the one that is a big enough franchise to pull people away from Pokemon Go, but it wasn't, clearly. And I don't know if there's another one out there that could necessarily do it. So if Pokemon Go were to, shutter in the next couple of years, I think that would be a massive surprise.
Yeah, because I feel like it's one of those franchises that's lasted this long. I don't see it going away in the immediate future.
And it's not like Pokemon is getting any less popular.
Right. Yeah. Like it's the little engine that could, right? Like, I mean, when I talk about this, I don't mean this like dismissively towards it. Pokemon's one of those things when was like in high school when the first Pokemon games came out. And I was like, that's neat. And then a few years later, like people were still buying Pokemon cards and the movies were coming out. There were more games. And I was like, that's cool. And then it's like 10 years later and like people are still just, if not more obsessed with the cards.
Yeah.
And then 20 years later, right? Like, so when you think of it from that perspective, right? Like this only dies if it's like horribly mismanaged. Mm-hmm. Because there's no real competition in this style of phone game. And you can honestly imagine, like, as we move into more AR sort of centered devices, like glasses and that sort of thing, like this becomes even more something that you just port over, right? Mm-hmm. Because as you have AR glasses, suddenly you're not looking through a phone. The like Pikachu is just popping out from behind a bush, which honestly sounds both thrilling and terrifying.
No, that sounds straight up amazing.
I don't know. If I'm walking at night and Mr. Mime comes out from behind a building,
it depends on.
Now, hang on. Pikachu sounds amazing.
It depends on the Pokemon.
Yeah, I don't know that I want Mr. Mime popping up out of.
Can you imagine you're walking at night downtown and you hear a sound and you like look around and like Mr. Mime is like looking out from behind a building and like pulls back and hides? Like, what a terrifying experience.
I guess maybe that's the next game the Bloober team is making.
I mean, we have to have Christina beta test that. Let's see. In other Pokemon news, Nintendo being more litigious, there was a Chinese-developed game called Pokemon Monsters Remake.
Pocket Monsters.
Or excuse me, Pocket Monsters.
Which
Reading
is
two
literally
separate
what
lines.
Pokemon is short for. Like, it didn't even have the brains of Pal World to rename a little bit.
They have been ordered to pay the Pokemon Company $14.7 million for copyright infringement. There are screenshots of this game out there. Like, they straight up lift like ash out of like the image.
It's pretty blatant copyright infringement.
I mean, this is one of those things, like we were talking about Undertale earlier, right? Like that some game companies are very litigious over this sort of thing. They don't want these fan games out there.
Well, Nintendo in particular is they very much will turn a blind eye to certain things and crack down on others in a way of like, when some fan games get big enough, Nintendo just kind of goes, have fun. But then there's other ones that, how many, of course, now the only one I can think of is, when people modded guns into Pokemon, and Nintendo was like, absolutely not.
Well, I mean, they pulled another Metroid 2 remake down because they were putting out their Metroid 2 remake at the time.
I was gonna say a lot of the Breath of the Wild mods that Point Crow got nailed for, it was because Tears of the Kingdom was coming out that year.
Right.
But like, this is just.
I mean, Nintendo has always been in a situation where they would sue people over this sort of thing. So like this, I don't think is surprising. It's not new.
Yeah.
Like if you were putting Mario in something, Nintendo was always going to sue you. They didn't care so much about your like ROM hacks for Mario 1 as long as you're not trying to sell them.
Yeah. But like, it kills me that they literally Pocket Monsters. I'm like, that's literally what Pokemon is short for. You didn't even do like Pocket Pals or just. Who thought who thought they would get away with this?
I think a lot of times these companies don't think they'll get away with it. I think their hope is we'll make enough money so that whatever we get fined or sued for doesn't eclipse how much money we made.
Maybe.
Right? Can we make $15 million and lose $14.7 million? Well, we still made a profit, right? I mean, you see these blatant ripoffs on even like the American app stores all the time. When I'm browsing games on the iPhone, I see things where I'm like, that's pretty blatant that you're ripping off this other game.
Yeah.
I saw one the other day that looked like it had Hotel Transylvania. Like it looked like it had the characters from that in it, but like it never said Hotel Transylvania in the name. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's the Dracula character.
Yeah. Adam Sandler's coming for you.
Adam Sandler doesn't care. Adam Sandler shows up and collects his paycheck. Takes his friends on vacations that masquerade as films. Let's see. Steam is now allowing filtering of games built with AI. So about a year ago, Steam started requiring games to check a box if they used generative AI in the development of the game. Now they have added that on the user side, so you can filter games out if they have used AI in some way in the development. And this is tied to, at the same time, the Call of Duty developers coming out and saying, hey, Black Ops 6 uses generative AI, which I'm sure was one of those things they had to admit it as part of that, and this was going to be, public.
Yeah.
People have accused them of this previously. Now they're coming forward and saying, hey, yeah, we did. Like AI is going to be a tool in game development. Like that's just the reality of it.
I'll say, I think the thing for me is, and they may have said this, I just don't know, but the thing for me is like, okay, where did you use AI? How much, because this has been a big, talking about Pokemon fan games, Pokemon Infinite Fusion had a huge blow up about a month ago over, we're going to use AI to put in the Pokedex entries now.
This is a fan game.
Yeah. Yeah. And the blowback over that because of all the people who had, and we're maybe going to use AI to make some of the sprites, and the blowback over that from all the people who, did sprite work, did text box work, did all of that. And so I don't know. I would be curious to know where they used AI and how much of it they used. I mean, clearly a significant amount, enough to have gotten called out on it and have to admit it, but
yeah, I don't think they were specific in exactly how they used it. Is this like loading screens you're using it to generate some background images? Are you using it to actually generate maps? Like, how detailed are they going to get on that?
Yeah.
The DCU, that is the sort of film universe that is
film universe.
Yeah, that is being run by James Gunn, who made the Guardians of the Galaxy films. He's directing the new Superman film that
looks amazing.
Comes out this summer. He was interviewed. I think this was part of IGN Fan Fest, and he discussed the possibility of new games using DC properties, and said that he had spoken to both Rocksteady and NetherRealm about the possibility of new DC games.
Well, and following up on last week when we talked about Rocksteady's developing a new single player, I saw this morning it was leaked that it's probably a Batman Beyond game.
Yeah, so, talking to Rocksteady, we already kind of have some leaks that they're working on a Batman game. So, that's not too shocking that they would do, what else they might do after that, right? DC related.
Remake Superman 64, you cowards.
I think NetherRealm is maybe the one that's more interesting because if you remember, they were making the Injustice games. They were kind of doing that cadence of a Mortal Kombat game, then an Injustice, then a Mortal Kombat, then an Injustice. They broke that cadence because there was the threat of them being sold off by Warner Brothers, and then they wouldn't have the license if they were in the middle of developing another Injustice game. So this seems like there's the possibility they go back and make a new Injustice game. Those games were big sellers for them. So if you like the Injustice games, there's a chance. And they're still making comics and stuff from that Injustice universe, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was never a big fan of how I always kind of felt like Injustice tried too hard to make everything into gritty Batman Begins level. So I don't love that, but I know there are people who love that, so hopefully it turns out well.
Yeah, I would imagine the storytelling probably feels incredibly played out in that because it's another Superman is evil storyline.
Yeah.
The games are good, though.
The comic books kill off Nightwing because he gets knocked over and hits his head on a rock. And it's like, really? This is so dumb. But, yeah. I could complain a lot about that. I won't go on that rant. I hope that whatever they're doing turns out well.
Xbox Game Pass has added Balatro. If you want to play our 2024 Game of the Year, you can play it now if you have Xbox Game Pass. It's also a cheap game. It's like $10 on Steam, I feel like, at this point. So,
to add one thing to this, just because it's not listed in here, Balatro also won its ratings appeal in Europe. So it was got the 18.
About gambling.
Yeah, it got an 18 rating. It got changed to 12.
Nice.
Even 12 and above seems somewhat ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because it actually isn't a gambling game. But yeah, that's certainly better. I'm sure that's a relief to them. They also did announce some more DLC coming to that game. So new card backs from different games.
New Friends of Jimbo pack.
Which that's cool. Let's see, Retrobit Publishing. So this is a developer who sort of goes back and helps republish some older games. They have admitted that some of their 16-bit releases contain fan translations, and do not properly credit those fan translations. That's the issue here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's not the issue that
No.
it's a fan translation. It's the fact that they did not properly credit them or compensate them.
Well, and this is one of the things, like you said, the issue is that they didn't compensate them. I will never understand why video game companies don't like contract out fan translators when they're looking to do this stuff. Like that to me seems like such a basic thing to do. So yeah. Containing fan translations makes total sense to me. Not paying the fan translators for their work, that's the problem.
I do not know the specifics of this. I wonder sometimes if it's an issue of they look at it and suspect that the legal entanglements would be such a pain to untangle that they go, well, let's just skip it, right? Like, because a lot of those fan translations aren't one person, they're a team of people working,
Right.
Sure.
and there might be, and sometimes they're taking work that was done on an earlier translation that maybe got abandoned or something, and they're picking that up and
Yeah.
if not fully using it, at least using it as a base. And I wonder if their thing is, well, how many layers down and how many lawyers and how many people are we going to have to like go talk to try to
Yeah.
get this untangled?
I haven't watched it yet because I haven't played the game yet, but there's one of the fan translators for the Ace Attorney Investigations 2 did a playthrough of the official release. And I'm really looking forward to when I play the game so I can watch that and see what he says about how things
Got localized.
got localized, like how how they did it when they were doing the fan translation, and like what he sees different. And I'm sure he'll go into like why they did certain things and not. Yeah, I don't know. Fan translation. I mean, this is just one of my hyperfixations is translation studies. So I could go off on this again in a much more positive way, but I won't.
Speaking of some retro releases, Limited Run has been putting out some old NES games, and as part of that, they've actually been producing NES cartridges so that if you had original hardware, you could actually play these re-releases or these new games on the original hardware. So they put out 2, Rugrats Adventures in Gameland. No, I did not ask E.G. Daily about it, Mario. I don't know what her favorite part of that game is. And Piopo.
Sure.
Which I'm assuming is some Japanese game
Pio
that
Pal?
we're not familiar with. But apparently these cartridges that they sent out to people who purchased these can damage the hardware because of issues with the voltage regulation in the cartridges. So the voltage is not exactly the same as it was in original NES carts. So over time, using this in your hardware could damage and break the original hardware. So they have caught this problem. They are sending out new versions of the carts that are fixed to everyone to replace the broken ones. So one thing I think this is kind of interesting about this is there's probably going to be some of these broken carts that like slip out, that get sold and everything. So if you see one of these games, maybe be extremely careful putting this into your hardware. Because I would imagine this is an issue not just for the original hardware, but also some of these, emulation hardware systems as well.
Well, and yeah, I wonder. I mean, I don't know what sort of liability there would be, but yeah, if they were to bring one of these to even just like a pawn shop, right? That sells like old games, and so I wonder if I imagine if they're thinking forward, there will be some indicator to say this is sort of a Mark I copy, this is a Mark II copy.
Yeah.
If you get this Mark I copy, do not sell it. Or sell it, I guess, but know that this is the copy that you're getting instead. So
Yeah, the other thing to consider is how many people who are buying these sort of like collector's editions are actually ever playing the cart itself.
Sure.
Or playing it more than just like once to see it boot up. They're probably playing this on, modern hardware for the most part.
Yeah.
This is just like a novelty, right?
That would be my guess, and if that's the case, then all's totally fine. But
Yeah. I think you definitely still want to indicate it in some way, because then, like,
making them distinguishable, I think, is important.
like if I'm interested in it as a collector's item, then I can go buy the Mark I version, knowing that it's not going to be a problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
And usually there is. I mean, in the old days of like putting out revisions of carts, they would indicate in some fashion on a lot of those. Not always, but let's see. PlayStation 5 Pro sales are now slightly behind PlayStation 4 Pro sales at the same price, point in their lifespan. So, in other words, PlayStation 5 Pro is trailing PlayStation 4 Pro. I wonder if it's the $700 price tag.
Nah, that can't be it.
I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. I also just remember when the PS4 Pro got announced, there were specific games that they said, this will run better on your PS4 Pro.
Right.
Yeah.
This is like designed with the PS4 Pro. And I haven't seen that of anything that came out on the PS5 Pro or even just the state of play. I think there were like things on the bottom that said, this is running off of a PS5 Pro, but there was nothing to indicate that like performance is going to be noticeably different.
Yeah.
There have been patches, like Astrobot got a patch that will allow it to run at a higher frame rate and at a higher resolution. I think part of the problem is, I think you're right, part of the appeal of the PlayStation 4 Pro was that the PlayStation 4 hardware was underpowered when it was originally released. So a lot of PlayStation 4 games on original hardware are kind of clunky, especially as you got to the later stages of that system's lifespan.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of games that really struggled with particularly frame rate issues. I don't see that as much with PlayStation 5 games. And so there's not as much of a desire to upgrade to this new thing because when even when they were showing this off initially, they would show those side-by-side screens. And a lot of times I was sitting there looking at my computer monitor, struggling to see what the difference was.
I was going to say, this is another conversation we've had is like, okay, if you don't have the type of monitor that supports
Right.
whatever higher resolution or whatever they're doing, like, does it even really matter? And then I also wonder, I don't think this is the biggest factor, but I also think part of it is, it took so darn long to get a PS5 when it first came out, and it was all sold out everywhere forever, that like probably people got their PS5 more recently between the drop of PS5 Pro versus the PS4 and PS4 Pro. So
Yeah.
like I just spent
That's probably fairly
$600 a year ago rather
Yeah.
than 3 years ago.
accurate. Yeah.
I also feel like we're just starting now, it feels like, to really start to get most games as exclusives for PlayStation 5 or
Yeah.
Xbox Series SX, right? Like early on in this console generation, a lot of games were cross-generation.
Yeah.
And we're finally getting those games that they're like, oh, no, this only runs on the new hardware.
We're what? 4 years into the PS5?
Yeah, because it was right around
Is it 2020?
2020.
I guess I know it was like the height of COVID, but I don't know if it was
Yeah.
2020 or 2021.
I think it
I
was.
think it is 2020.
I think it was early 2020, and it was all sold out through.
And it would have been like November that year, I want to say.
So
Yeah.
like 5 years,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I mean, and we had talked about it with the Switch. It makes you wonder if console generations are going to go back to being a little bit longer.
Yeah.
If they're doing this like mid-cycle upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, they already have, right, been longer,
Yeah.
and that we are approaching consoles that last 7 years for their lifespan, where it used to be a firm 5 years.
Oh, maybe
right?
I'm thinking that they were longer and then they got shorter and now they're going back, but I guess they were just always shorter.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at the NES, Super NES, Nintendo 64, those are like 5-year console lifespans.
Gotcha.
Now, obviously, right? Like not everybody is on
Of course.
day one getting the new hardware. But like now, like the new hardware itself is taking 7 years. They're supporting the hardware for 10 years in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's, I think, less of a rush to buy new hardware.
Yeah, and Alicia is absolutely right in thinking like we may be going into 5 years. It'll be 5 years in November, something like that. But in many ways, it really feels like
Maybe
year
3,
like because of how
November 2020.
okay,
Yeah.
how consistently unavailable it was for so long.
I was gonna say my sister had it wish list, was watching, got scammed trying to get it. She didn't get a PS5 until after Christmas of 2021.
Right. I think in a lot of ways, right? Like it's sort of like the Wii. Like people waited 2-3 years to get a Wii because Wiis were so sold out everywhere for that first year or two. Like it wasn't just the first year; it like went into year 2. Like you struggled to find a Wii, and I think you're right because of COVID, because of the scarcity. Like this console generation is 5 years in, but it feels more. I think you're right, like 3 or 4 tops.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, I mean, and I also think $700 plays a big.
Oh,
part
of course.
Oh,
of
yeah.
course, yeah.
Like,
Oh no,
that's a lot of money.
these are all factors for sure.
We already talked about Descenders Next. That got announced for a release date of April 9th. Among Us VR is getting repurposed for a non-VR version called Among Us 3D. That's pretty neat, though. I feel like the appeal of that game was people could play it on anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I remember during the height of COVID, let's go back to COVID again, when we were teaching remotely, I remember PRSSA like doing an event where we did Among Us. Everybody played Among Us, right? And like we were like streaming it out, via Zoom so people could see it. And
I played on my phone with one of my friends who I hadn't talked to in a couple of years, but she was like, "Hey, we're getting together playing Among Us on Discord." And I was like, "Sure."
Yeah, I feel like that was the appeal, that you could play it on anything. Granted, you could probably play this new version on phones as well, but not as easy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would be my guess as well. Cool though. I mean, I'm sure there are still people that are
I would say I still
very
see
much
people
enjoying it.
I still see people playing it.
And maybe this will be another little boon for it as well.
Yeah.
Well, isn't the show coming out sometime this year too?
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. I don't know when it's coming out, but they are supposedly still putting out that show.
Yeah, so that might give it a
They
little
did
boost.
release the trailer for that.
Yeah.
That might give it a little boost too.
Finally, Microsoft has demoed a new AI tech that they've been working on specifically to work with games. They note that this can generate game visuals and actions. One might say maybe like for a Call of Duty game, since they own Call of Duty now. I think the more interesting thing is they talked about this being used to revive old games, like as a sort of game preservation. And everybody's been pointing to Blinks the Time Sweeper, which I think is the funniest response from game journalists.
Well, the funny thing is that's the first game that came to mind as well.
There is a love for Blinks the Time Sweeper that far outweighs the quality of Blinks the Time Sweeper. And I think it's one of those things, like the name and concept are just so engaging for an audience.
That's funny.
But anyways, so I don't know exactly how this would work. I also sort of wonder, like, if the idea is, hey, we will feed this game in to the AI, and the AI will make a version that runs on modern hardware. If I wonder how, like, if you use AI now, and I've played around with AI making like images, let's say. So often, like if you're making lots of images, let's say 10 images, like so many of those will have, well, there's a problem here with this one has a problem here, this one has a problem here, that you're going to have to go back and regenerate the image, or you're going to have to like go in and edit via Photoshop or something, which has its own AI tool. So you have AI editing AI, I guess. But I wonder like how much is actual time and work that's going to save versus just having developers make a version of this that works on newer hardware.
Yeah. I mean, part of me thinks it would be a significant amount of time, even if it takes 10, 20 attempts.
Mm-hmm.
Can't imagine that takes all that long in terms of the editing process. Maybe it does. I mean, and maybe it's you get AI to do a first copy and you get artists to sort of work and edit that.
Yeah.
That I think would save maybe the most amount of time. But I mean, I do feel like this would save time, but I think that it's certainly a legitimate question to ask.
I mean, we talked about last week that Final Fantasy IX remake that might be coming out, that this is not going to be a total reimagining in the way that Final Fantasy VII has. It'll be a much more, playing it close to the bone remake, probably new graphics and some
more along the lines of a remaster.
Yeah, like some quality of life improvements.
It may be like the Super Mario RPG remake, right?
So I could see something like that. But I just don't know that AI is good enough to do that yet.
Yeah.
And
or
obviously
at least consistently good enough to do that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like if you take something high profile like that, right? Like Blinks the Time Sweeper may be a different case. But if you take something that's beloved, like a Final Fantasy game.
Well, I mean, clearly Blinks is beloved as well. At least in people's minds it is.
Yeah.
Maybe some rose-tinted glasses there.
Yeah, weren't his glasses green tinted?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yellow, maybe.
Yeah. But I feel like if you take something that's actually beloved, right? Like, what is the response going to be when there's like even the slightest imperfection? The slightest, like, I worry less about graphics than I do like how it plays.
Oh, that would be, yeah. If I were in charge of Square, I would be terrified to do that because fans are so knowledgeable that they would be able to pick that out.
Yeah.
It feels like almost immediately.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Oh, no, there'd be YouTube videos immediately, like nitpicking. Like,
I'd say within 12 hours, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. But part of me does wonder that with some, to use Final Fantasy VIII as an example, or 9, I guess. If it has that foundation already of like, okay, this is what, if you were to say, take Final Fantasy VIII and give me graphics in the vein of, I don't know, insert game that it would be a little bit updated to.
Final Fantasy 15.
Sure. Like could it, with that amount of knowledge, could it, produce something on a consistent basis as compared to like producing something new? Like if it has that foundational knowledge already, I don't know nearly enough about AI to know how it would work in that sense.
Sure.
But, part of me does wonder in terms of that consistency, if it could reach it.
It almost makes me wonder, like, the RZ game.
Oh, sure.
Like how, like, that you can tell it was such a labor of love from the people doing it, and like how all the little quirks of the CDI with like the slightly off kilter lip syncing and that, and like how much of that would AI get versus like just copy paste, and how people would read it differently. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think Final Fantasy is one thing, right? Because those games are certainly not about the feel as much. But like, let's say you take something like a Mega Man or a Super Mario Brothers, where so much of that is about how does it feel? Does it feel the same way? Because you break Mega Man if it feels different.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't care if the bosses look pretty close and like, have nice updated graphics and everything. If it doesn't play like Mega Man, that's the entire appeal, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's what they'll do with Final Fantasy. They'll put it through AI and say, make Final Fantasy in the vein of CDI Zelda.
I feel like that was the chaos one, right? Like
Strangers of Paradise.
Strangers of Paradise, yes. Final Fantasy Origin.
Chaos. I would certainly agree with that. Like Final Fantasy, the gameplay. I mean, it's a turn-based.
Yeah, you're not there for the gameplay. You're there for the story.
I don't mean that dismissively.
No.
Final
That's not. That's not how I took it.
No, it's just a different priority.
The feel of those games is not the big emphasis in those games.
Yeah, but the question then does, I think, become, is that something they might change for a remaster or remake? Would you make a more action RPG the ways that the last 4 or 5 Final Fantasies have been?
The way they did with 7.
7 and 15 and 16 and I assume Strangers of Paradise as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of Brave New World, right?
It's definitely interesting.
We'll see what comes with it. And maybe this is less like draconian than it feels and sounds.
Sure.
Right? Like maybe this is, hey, we're going to prototype games using AI, and then that allows us to like play around with different ideas that we have. And maybe this AI for old games is talking about like building emulation to like run these old games. Like we don't know exactly.
Yeah.
All right, that does it for news. So let's move on to our big question. It's warming up. It is supposed to hit 60 today. Actually, it says right now it is at 60 degrees.
Bless.
So
After being like single digits last week, getting multiple days off for snow. It's wild.
Yeah.
Wow, I wonder why everyone's sick.
Right?
So it is warming up. We are like 2 weeks out from spring break. So what's your idea of a good beach game? Especially since almost everything is playable on some portable now. Between the Switch and the Steam Deck and everything, you can play almost any game now on some portable system. So what's your idea of a really great game to play at the beach? I don't know that any of us are going to a beach for spring break. I don't know. Are you headed home?
I am not. I have no intention, at the very least. I'll be staying here.
Well, you would at least be near a beach theoretically headed back.
I'd be closer.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'd be closer to one of these. Sorry, am I going first? I apologize. I was looking at my phone.
No, I was asking you the question about being near a beach. But like, if you want to go first,
Sure.
Go right ahead.
To me, one of the games, and I think that this is more just like the game I think of as like the portable game, which I don't know why. It's just because it's the one I played growing up. But it's the one like when my mom and I would go to like the pool at our apartment. When I wasn't swimming, the game that I would bring on my Game Boy was Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. And so to me, I brought it if I went with her to when she would get like her hair done. I would bring it. Basically, that was the game that was always traveling with me. And so there's definitely like beachy parts of that game, significant like beachy parts of that game.
Right.
But that to me is just like the portable game that I kind of immediately go to.
All right, cool. Alicia?
Well, it's funny because talking about the beach, part of me always associates Final Fantasy VII with the beach because when I was doing my master's, I was out in Philadelphia, and one of my best friends there, her family had a house in Jersey on the shore. Like, they're really rich. I'm jealous. But like there was one summer that I went with her for like a week or whatever, and we're sitting on the beach, we're chilling out, and that I listened to an audiobook version of the Final Fantasy VII On the Way to a Smile book. And so like I always think of that, and then like Costa del Sol and all that. Mm-hmm. But I think the game I'm gonna go with is probably if we're taking it portable, which I guess you could now on Steam Deck or something. Kingdom Hearts 1, especially that opening part when you're at Destiny Islands, but just even beyond that, you're just enjoying your time with these familiar faces, and you're getting the intrigue of that bigger universe before it all gets really convoluted and crazy.
Well, and you got like the Atlantica level, so you got to do some swimming and all
yeah.
the best part of the game.
Oh, those original PS2 controls for that section. But yeah, that I think I've said before, 1 and 2 are both very like summer games for me, so but I think 1 has the more relaxing vibe than 2 does of like we're just getting to start with all the bigger universe and it's not too crazy to understand yet.
Especially that opening.
Yeah.
Right?
The Destiny Islands portion is so, I mean, I would restart that game and just play Destiny Islands all the time.
I also feel like that first game particularly is very sort of kind of lighthearted.
Yeah.
Before those games got super serious.
Yeah.
And like about the end of existence,
Yeah.
like everything, and got super depressing. Like that first game is very kind of light and enjoyable. I mean, you know, it's a game. I think there's a reason that game appeals to audiences who don't like a lot of other types of games.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can definitely see that. Yeah. So like I thought of 2 games. One, like whenever I think of like sort of beachy stuff, I think of Mario Sunshine.
Yeah.
It's the game that I had thought of, and I was like, Justin's going to judge me if I say that.
I thought of Sunshine and then I was like, but I've never actually played Sunshine. But it's such a beach game that like I feel like I should say it, but I've never played it, so I shouldn't.
Justin's going to judge me. That's good. I mean, look, there's a lot of problems with that game, but like that game definitely, like maybe more than just about almost any other Mario game, like has a very distinct vibe to it.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think Odyssey nails it on a couple of those levels,
Yeah.
but Sunshine, it's the entirety of it.
Yeah, I think that's more what I mean. Like
Yeah.
as a whole game, not a singular level or singular world, right? Because the whole thing is so beach focused. So like you just kind of get into that mood. And then the other thing, whenever I think of like the beach, I think of water. And so I think of Wave Race 64, which is like one of those amazing games that it is sort of amazing. It's some 20 plus years later, and we still have not topped that game. Like even the GameCube version, was it Blue Storm?
That sounds right.
Is not as good as that original N64 game. It doesn't have the full physics system and everything. And when you're playing that game, it feels like you're on water. And I don't think any game has ever replicated that as well as the original Wave Race 64 did. And so even though that game is not necessarily entirely about the beach, though there are beachy levels and everything, I always think of that game because of the feeling of water as you're playing it. Yeah. Maybe the best water simulation ever, at least as far as like that you're playing in the water, not like just something that's decorative. All right. So that does it. Thank you to Alicia and to Mario. Thank you to our listeners. As always, you can check out SalukiGames.com for past episodes, as well as our Game of the Year coverage. All those lists and everything, as well as our collective list and awards are up on there. There's also some older content on there. There's some videos that students produce, like there's one that OJ did on the history of Final Fantasy. So there's some kind of fun stuff up there that you can check out. But that'll do it for this week. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, get out there, play something fun, maybe something on the beach. Enjoy this nice weather for a change, and we'll talk to you soon.